Hello, everyone. Welcome to Secure IT, where we discuss all things cybersecurity, people, trends, and products. And I want to thank you for joining us on our continued journey. Today's a big day. We mix it up a little bit. We're going to go a little easy on the cybersecurity part of the conversation. Well, kind of. Mark Debinski, who I consider a mentor, influencer, and friend, has been kind enough to join me today. And influencer. He does influence me with a lot of conversations and meetings. And as you'll learn more in this conversation, so indirectly, he still influences cybersecurity. So as his LinkedIn profile says, very clinically, president, board member, leadership, strategy, succession. What doesn't say is team magic and avid runner. Mark Debinski, welcome.
Thank you so much, Olaf. It's great to see you. And I look back at my first trip to Torrance to meet you was back in 2013, I believe it was.
Wow. That's so we are celebrating 10 years, Mark. And I
Exactly.
remember Todd Morax, our mutual friend, meeting him up in California in Los Angeles. And he had this bright red beard at the time, which I think he's now changed, but it was November and I'm there with an equally, black beard, and we were very fully facial hair growth men talking to each other. But yeah, fond memories. And you came over, you talked to us about improving your team's efficiencies. And I'd like the world actually to know, at least my world, know more about you and share your journey. So let's start at the beginning. Like I've told our listeners, we're changing the format up a bit, and it's going to be back and forth, a conversation more free flowing. So Mark, let's start with your career, right? And it's all there on LinkedIn, and I'm going to open up those links to people who follow this podcast, and they'll see the information sciences bachelor's and then Loyola Marymount after that, and onward and upward, including behavioral studies. Can you share top three career moves or major milestone as to how you got here? A lot of people who are on this podcast are listening in, either starting careers or looking for career tips, usually in technology. You have an equally exciting field. So tell us a little bit about three major career moves and milestones that got you where you are today.
No, certainly. Thanks, Philip, for the intro. I'll start by saying that I've always been fascinated by family businesses and closely held firms. And that goes back to when I was very young. I grew up with a single mom, and back in the 70s, that wasn't very cool as far as society was concerned. But she taught at a private school, so I could attend a private school. She felt their education was very important. And the point I'm making here is what I realized is my friends who had these big houses and swimming pools, and some of them, their families had airplanes. The majority of those families owned family businesses and closely held firms. And I made the connection there, not only for the success that one could have, but the flexibility and the freedom, as well as the huge responsibility that one has when they're running a family business. That led me to my first job out of college. And I've always been a student of IT. I received my bachelor's degree in information systems management. And my first job was for a bank, and I chose to go into a management training program for community banking so I could still study family businesses, closely held firms, professional services firms, architect, engineers, those types of firms, and look at them from a financial perspective. And as many bankers do that have an entrepreneurial spirit, after a couple of years, I ended up going to work for one of my banking customers, and that was probably a major career move, number one. And it was a business that had I've been around for about 25 years, two partners, equal 50-50 partners, non-family members, but friends from the industry. And 50-50 adds a whole another dynamic to decision-making. And I started as controller, and it was a wholesale distribution company. And I eventually rose to president of that organization to help transition it from the first to the second generation.
50-50. Those are fighting words, Mark. I can only imagine, right? You've got to bring, your best behavior. You've got to manage relationships, and you are equal in the truest sense of the term. So that literally puts your skill set to work.
Yeah, it was interesting. And one of the partners was a New Yorker. The other was from North Jersey, which is just across the river. And so there were some fairly strong attitudes. The interesting thing, because there was so much trust in the partnership, that when it came down to really difficult decisions, one of the approaches to conflict resolution is to basically to pass it and say, you're more passionate about this and I'll let you have this decision, but I get the next one. And so it's a, kind of a quid pro quo that's okay as long as it's notified upfront. And, things as far as what state were we going to open up the next location, or which accounting firm were we going to use. Some of those large decisions were made by not a flip of a coin, but basically acquiescing to the partner that was more passionate about the decision.
Trusted advisor. That's one of the monikers I missed in the introduction, Mark. But, so you talk about trust and you talk about, the equivalent of flipping a coin or saying, no, you take one. What I generally refer to as the Debinski tips and tricks, which I'm dying to come to, but I mean, we're barely 5 minutes into this conversation and I've got 3 or 4 different rabbit holes I can go through, but for the sake of discipline and our producer, Melvin, I'm going to stay on track just for a little bit. Okay. So we talked about career moves that got you here. The takeaway being that you practice what you preach, or you drink your own Kool-Aid, you do 50-50, you bring in industry partners, etc. Um, I've got a split here, but I'll do Solomon-like decision. Let's talk about, and we rarely talk about this, a few setbacks in your career or lessons that you learned, right? This was the happy part. I picked the right partners. If I was to define, looking from the outside in, 3 to 5,000 miles away, your growth has been nothing short of steady, right? There's no, at least to me, looking from the outside in, right? You look at the organization, it's steady, it's growing, it's moving, you've checked marked all the strategy boxes. Let's go on the dark side for a minute. Can you talk about a few career setbacks or lessons you learned?
Yeah, I sure can. I actually left the family business that I had run and had taken that firm up to about 70 million in revenue. And I was lured or recruited, we should say, to a very fast growing logistics firm. And there was a contract and there was money in the car and all those types of things. It's very attractive. But the owner, as happens in many cases, was not emotionally ready for a number two in the business. And the more that I became ingrained in the business and developed trust with the other leadership and management folks, and this was a company that had about 40 locations around the country, similar to a franchise. It was an agency model. But the more I became well doing my job in the business, the more agita and stress I got from the owner. And so it wasn't long before I realized that I was in a fairly unique situation, and it probably wasn't going to end well. And after several proud career moves and working my way up to the next step, I found myself around November of one year telling my wife that we probably shouldn't take the Caribbean trip over the winter because we might want to watch our dollars because I might have a move coming up. And so it was very humbling.
Wow, interesting. Um, yeah, I'm going to take the other end of the rabbit hole here, the fork in the road. So your job involves working with teams. You worked with Aurora on multiple occasions. It's quick to say, "Hey, Mark, either we have a problem or we don't. We need you to fix something, or we need you to do an annual checkup, or we need you to vet for this job description or measure for a person being a good fit for a certain job." You introduced me early to reading desk the right way and gave us the colorful wheels and had us put people in different parts of the wheel. If there was one thing I could say that you do well, I mean that with all due respect, you do a lot of things well, is measure, right? Measure and be able to deliver and be able to ensure that teams work efficiently. We talked about trust. Well, God only knows there's enough management books out there that talk about, trust being the basic tenet for teams to work together. So finally, with that set up my question, right? I firmly believe, you know, whether it's cybersecurity or running efficient teams or coaching or strategy, it's always people. It always comes down to people. They're like children. You can't live with them, can't live without them. Uh, and you've had, the last 10 years that I've known you and before that, a vast variety of shapes and sizes of teams to work with. Can you share some of the trends and habits, uh, successes, failures going in? You are, an experienced people doctor. And sometimes, you barely ring the doorbell and you know what's happening. So talk to us about your
Sure. Thanks so
experience.
much. And you're absolutely correct. It all gets down to the people, no matter what type of business, whether it's a product business, a service business, or an IT business, it's the people. And, I think if I had a superpower, we would probably call it business therapy. And, the formal word for that is facilitation and a high level of empathy. You've heard of emotional intelligence that most people have, but being able to read the room, it's not just self awareness, but it's the social awareness of what's going on in an organization, who has the title, but sometimes who has the influence, and oftentimes there are two different people, or sometimes groups of people. And so, yeah, we go in and we try to go in without guns blazing. And we often start with a talent assessment, which is what we did with you years back. You referred to the DISC. We do use the DISC. It's one of the best behavioral and communication type assessments that's out there. But we also add a few other assessments into the mix, something that helps us understand people's motivators, the why about how they do things. Well, I mentioned emotional intelligence. That's very important. We have an assessment that uses a science called axiology, and that measures basically a three-dimensional level of how someone thinks around people, systems, and enterprise. And while I mention these assessments, it's really important to say that we never use the assessments and the reports and the data to make hard decisions. We simply use them to help us have better conversations, right? We can draw out the natural talents of someone. We can also take a look at their 25 leadership competencies and how they stack up against the role that they have in the organization. And in addition to trust, communication is a key for teams, and this helps us open up communication not only with the individuals with whom we're working, but also with the teams. And by having something objective that we can point to, and we can say map everyone on a disc wheel, and it sounds a little bit minor league academic, but it helps people understand why someone else may approach a problem a different way, or why they might come at them very assertive because they're passionate about a certain motivator. And so that really helps us peel back a couple layers of the onion. And during that process, we get to know the organization, we get to know the people. And most importantly, as we work with the owner or the partners, if it's a professional services firm, we really try to understand what we call the commander's intent. Is this going to be something that's going to be built for an exit in 2 years? Is this something that is going to be developed for a legacy for the next two or three generations? We have a client in just outside of Jefferson City, Missouri, and they're going into their fourth generation. It's very structured, and they have a board, and we worked with them just over the past 2 years to go from the third generation CEO to the fourth generation CEO, and bring him in. And so the assessments that we use really set the table for conversation. We never use the gladiator thumbs up or thumbs down to make a decision, but they help us have better conversations. I'll give you a little hint at one of the newest and we consider a coolest assessment coming down the pipe. It's called the adaptability quotient. So you've got your IQ. We already know about your EQ, your emotional intelligence. And my partner and I, Lindsay and I, were probably, I think, the 91st and 92nd person in the world to be certified in this adaptability quotient assessment that's just hitting the market.
Interesting. Facilitation. That's a great word, right? Whether what you do or cybersecurity, you're facilitating results, you're facilitating strategy, you're facilitating direction. You had me at empathy. I'm being vulnerable here. That's a hard one for me, Mark. Still working on it. But there is much to be said about business owners opening up and being direct and vulnerable and empathetic. And not that we aren't. It's just that perception. And so trust and communication were the two big words again. And I firmly believe good communication will help fix it's, trying to understand the other person, trying to allow for varied opinions and ideas. Um, and I want to take you down that road a little further. So we talk about teams, we talk about efficiencies. They seems to work well in a hierarchy in a family, for example. We're in COVID times. work from anywhere and work from home. So mom and dad and the family unit or whatever, or dad and mom and mom, to be politically correct here, whatever the family unit is, more, it works as a structure. And then we come to work, and I might be dating myself, but conversations involved leaving your sexuality, your God, and everything else at the door. And you come in, and there were sayings that, hey, you don't talk about women, sex, or religion at work. There was a time when I worked in offices where they didn't want you to display anything except very Stepford like workplace. And so we work hard, and we say, hey, we're a family at work and we're a team, and yet leave all this stuff away. And today, the model, I hope, is changing for the better. This is who you are as a person. I'm going to add another layer to that before I put this hot question in your lap. Right? We test for DISC, and we say you're missing this part, you're missing that part, and adaptability added to that. Yet, Mark, in the big picture, and I'm going to tie all this together for you, we are who we are. Greater force, God, whoever you want to put in there, has created, or we are from nature or nurture who we are. And there is a certain importance to recognizing, and I'm going to take from your book, introvert or extrovert or task-oriented, people-oriented, we are, I repeat, who we are. So put all of this together for me. You've got a team, you walk in, and you've got all these measurements. We're looking for trust and communication, and we're looking for efficiencies, and we're trying to create a cohesive, highly efficient group. Comments, thoughts.
Yeah, so it's great. And while we can measure, we'll call it the DISC or the Myers-Briggs or whatever 4-factor behavioral model, that that's how we communicate. Those are observable behaviors. And so if I watch you in a group, Phil, I can tell if you're extroverted or introverted, et cetera. Many people can work with people that have very different behavioral styles. That's that opposites attract, right? And also birds of a feather flock together. So people that have similar styles are going to naturally get along. Where humans connect is usually at the level below. If we picture an iceberg, the tip of the iceberg are those behavioral styles. What's below the iceberg is more formidable, and it makes up more of the person. Okay, that's the why we do the things that we do. And you are absolutely correct that we have to be a little bit more careful at work of what we say in some of the environments are more highly charged because of the sensitivities about some of these subjects. However, if people can understand that different folks on the team view the world differently and have different values, by understanding that and making it somewhat academic or at least objective, then they can respect that view a little bit different, as opposed to saying, oh, Philip's always going on about this and this and what he did over the weekend with his church service, et cetera. And as opposed to saying, I understand that Philip is motivated by a structured life. He has a very strong belief system, and I respect that for him. And so when we can help people understand that there are 12 primary driving forces why people do the things that they do. One of them is intellectual. It is intellectual, and people like you and I have a high intellectual driving force. But by people understanding that, they can not only accept but embrace the diversity on their team. And that has been one of the breakthroughs that we've had with some of the organizations with whom we work. And we work with a lot of family businesses, as I mentioned. But on Monday, I'll be with a $1 billion law firm with the managing regional managers from all over the country. And we're going to be going through exactly that discussion, because we have folks that are coming from different regions as well as very different values. And we'll be working with them to help them develop more as a team. And so in understanding and an awareness, and you had mentioned empathy, and I would challenge you, you have a high level of empathy, Philip. It's just that you don't always overemphasize that, right? Many leaders and business owners, they know what's going on. They understand how the other person is feeling, but they underemphasize that because they've got to keep the trains going in the right direction.
Exactly.
Simply not.
Exactly. Yep. So look, intelligent and empathetic. Yeah, I think we're done, Mark. You told me I'm good. So it's 22 minutes.
Well, you still have to influence other people. There's a lot of words.
So no, that's absolutely brilliant, right? Let me try to digest what you just said, and let me use the sales analogy, right? So back in Back in the day, it was, hey, I've got this bright, shiny thing. Come get it before stocks run out. This is going to change your life. It's an elixir or it's a magic box or whatever. Today, and there's this lady that I follow, Tiffany Bova, who does a lot of work on sales. And she says, look, all you've got to do is listen to your customer. Your customer is going to give you your 5-year plan. You can yell to your heart's content on the street corner, or you can stop for a minute and say, hey, what is it that you really need? How can I help you? And if I take that analogy, you're saying the same thing. You're saying communicate with the respect, and pardon the pun on the word respect, with respect to your customer. They may listen different, right? Lions listen in bullet points. Camels want details, right? And that's the dominant and the, the compliant. And, it's basically we get to be who we are, uh, but we've got to be aware of our customer or the person on the other end of the line and how they receive information. Is that a succinct summation?
Well, and that's a great way to describe it, Philip. And that's why we never want to be a permanent line item on somebody's P&L. When I said that we first met in 2014, we did a little business, then it was 2 or 3 years later that we came back in as your team growed. And so the idea is to help people have those conversations, to help build the team, to build the trust, and then have someone in the, in the organization carry it forward, or ideally more than one person. We call that the teacher person to fish approach, as you know, and that works very well. So it's again, it's not rocket science, but there's a little bit of science and a little bit of philosophy behind it. And to be honest, that's a great segue into the topic of cyber,
Yeah.
because as I mentioned, I've always been a student of IT. And when we're doing strategic plans with organizations and helping them look forward 3 and 5 years, and if it's generational, look down into the next generation, we have to bring topics like cyber to the table. That's something that a lot of small organizations just don't even think about it. I use the analogy of high blood pressure, where you hear about that high blood pressure is bad for you, and you should watch your diet, and that you could have a stroke, or even or even worse if you don't watch your high blood pressure. No one really does anything about it until there's some type of event, right? And so we try to help them understand that that there's this cyber threat lurking out there, and 9 times out of 10, these small to medium sized business, and I'm talking about folks that are, say, 150, up to 150 folks, they simply don't have the volume of people and the volume of revenue to support an avant-garde IT team. And so they need to rely on the experts out there. So their day-to-day folks, whether they're admin or they're out on the road, their sales, or they could be field service folks, so they can use the tools that they have, their tablets that make their business more efficient, and get the work done very efficiently, and share information, but they can use it without even thinking about the potential threats that are out there. And that's where we need, the folks like you and the other cyber experts to not only work on the known knowns, as I've heard it described before, but those, those unknown knowns that are
Unknown
coming down the
unknowns. Yeah,
pike.
this is true.
Yeah.
And thank you for gently nudging me towards cyber. You just made this podcast tax deductible. Thank you, Mark. So let's talk about cyber a little further, right? Yes. And I love the blood pressure analogy. Between blood pressure and empathy, you've got me nailed down perfectly. Been 2 for 2 so far. So, Mark, what does the future of cyber security look for you? And if you'll allow me to say from the outside in, right? And I don't mean that you aren't aware of this, that you are purveying it and shining a light on it in the interest of a vital part of business strategy. Fully agree. Things that we are struggling with generally as a group of facilitators, if I may use the term. Millennials are saying at this day and age, well, I'm sure you want me to have a 20-character password. Why the heck do I have to remember it? You got me here. You can look at me. You know how I type. You know how I speak. And company that acquired Aurora has this amazing artificial intelligence machine learning program that can figure out who you are to a high degree of accuracy just by the way you type.
Mhm.
Okay. Brilliant product used in cybersecurity pretty extensively. So we have our customers who are today's millennials. It's the the sons and grandsons of the people that we started with, who were saying, hey, I don't want to remember 20 character password. Just, you know who I am, make my services available to me. When it comes to cybersecurity today, earlier we had this electrified fence. It was called the office. You left the office and everything got cut off. There are large billion-dollar organizations that still operate with those same tenets. However, the world is changing. My insider or my employee could be sitting in the Philippines or Serbia or India. In fact, not could be, they are. And it's open ocean. So a topic that you're very familiar with and beautiful
Yeah.
artwork in the background as well.
So,
So
yeah. So first,
what does cybersecurity look like to you?
first it was the physical fence and then the geo fence. And, and now I like to use the term friction free because the users of the technology, whether they're using a tablet or their phone or their laptop, they really need to be able to do their work. And so the pressure on the folks that are coming from cybersecurity is to make it friction free. I fly about 100 times a year, and going through Clear it has just made it just wonderful between that and TSA PreCheck. It's always wonderful on a Monday to breeze right through. However, I know that I gave up some personal information. They've got my retina scan and they've got my
Yeah.
fingerprint, things like that. I have nothing to hide. But that's part of the give from the human. In order to have these benefits, we have to play the game. When it comes to your clients and the end user, it's really about making it friction free for them. And I think just like in any relationship, there are some things that we would like to have, and then there are also those deal breakers. And whether it's a 20 character password with an exclamation point at the front or the back of it, if that's a deal breaker, then you want to be on that team. You're going to have to play with that. But the idea is to make those deal breakers fewer and fewer. And what I see, your question was, what does the future look like? It's almost going back to when I set up the distributed network for the wholesale distributor, when we used a wide area network, and that was completely closed with the T1s that were connecting everything. Back then it was an AS400. I think that was upgraded to an RS6000. We're talking a long time ago, Philip. But the idea is that we were in a closed network. And what I see going down the road is people working in a similar closed network, but it's in the cloud. And that's up to you and
Right.
your teams to figure
Correct.
out. But no matter where I am, and I was on a boat on Wednesday with a few clients, spending some quality time with them. And, everyone was doing some work on the boat while we are going from one place to the next. And then we were in a bed and breakfast. And because we were actually lower than sea level, we had very poor connectivity. And so we go into the bed and breakfast, to their Wi-Fi, and are we secure or not? And so, the folks that had the secure network that they could sign into, they didn't have to worry about that. But for, a few of the folks there, they were just trusting that the innkeepers were not nefarious, so they got
Correct.
work
Yeah.
done. And
And
I think
yeah, that is the point, isn't it? I mean, that the point is whether it's in the cloud or anywhere, security should be a basic tip.
and I think it's become commonplace for users to accept that, when an unknown known becomes a known, then there are bug fixes. And, I already have a message on my iPhone that there's I think it's 16 point something tonight that's going to upgrade and has to do with
Yep.
some type of vulnerability, and that's just par for the course to enjoy the technical advantages and the ease of use that we have. We're going to have to let it automate itself. But I mean, how much work is that for me to let it update while I'm sleeping? It's not a pretty big deal. I think that it's the responsibility of the users to at least have a basic understanding of how things are working. And if we go back to the family businesses and cybersecurity, oftentimes there's such a gap between the the historical way. I don't want to say the old way, between the historical way of doing things and just the way things are done now, that oftentimes we have to look an owner in the eye, and that person might be 70 or 80 years old, and say, you just need to trust us. And that's where we can build the bridge between the relationship that we have with our client, if we're helping them through, say, a succession transfer, and in a very valid MSP or cybersecurity firm, because they just can't get their head around the trust that they need to open up to that firm and the dollars that they're going to be spending with that.
Well stated. Let's talk about you. So, if there's one thing I remember about you, it's avid runner. I think you got me started, and I have to report back 10 years later and a meniscus surgery that I have had to move on to biking, right? So, uh, this is what you do for fun. This is what you've done for your health, and you've sustained and been very tenacious about it. Tell us more.
Yeah, well, running gives you time to think, and most people will put the headset on or the aftershocks that goes on your temples, so you can still hear if cars or bikes or motorcycles are coming at you. But I don't always have music or a book on, to run. And I'm at the beach now. To run in the sand 4 miles, that's a healthy run, and you listen to the ocean and not listening to music, and that's very cathartic for folks. It's not for everybody, So whether it's biking or just taking a power walk or something like that, the other thing that I have a slight addiction to is saltwater fishing. And one of my best friends, we have a goal to catch 100 different saltwater species and then log them and take pictures and all those types of things. And we're up to 90.
Oh,
And
wow.
it takes some planning and it takes a little bit of investment. And we have to go far out sometimes to find the species. And we might be looking for one species and come up with something that we had never planned. But that's part of the adventure. But we were out a few weeks ago, and it took 4 hours just to get to the continental shelf where we were going to do some what's called deep drop fishing. And the 4 hours out there as the sun was coming up, and we have the beauty of nature and the beauty of a trusted colleague in conversation. That doesn't get much better than that.
Priceless. I agree. I totally agree. So, daily habits, meditation, besides running, sleep out in the open, dive into 40-degree water. Talk to us more.
Yeah, I've not done the cold plunges. I was recently, I think where it was, where they had, one of our neighbor has one actually. I pass it up on my run, and so maybe I'll try it this weekend. I've not done that. I am an avid practicer of meditation, and a couple of years ago we did a study on my brain because I was very skeptical of meditation, and so we went out to Scottsdale, Arizona, and we had an electroencephalograph put on my head, which is basically a fancy way of saying 18 or so electrodes that were measuring my
A little
thinking.
better
And
than one of those tinfoil caps. Huh?
yeah, so it looked kind of
Okay.
like, and we had an intern with us, and she was not ready for all the gel that they were going to put on her hair, but it ended successfully. But the point is, they did a base reading of how I responded or reacted to words that were either going to be negative triggers or positive, potentially positive triggers or neutral. And then I went away and meditated every single day for 4 months, and only for about 15 minutes. And I used just one of the generic Headspace. I think back then it was Headspace was the app that I was using. And I have to tell you, Phil, when I went back, the difference was amazing. And we have a whole
Really?
non-scientific paper that I'm happy to share. My sister's a scientist, and she gets upset when we share because it's not validated or peer reviewed. The point is, those things that affected me negatively originally, there was still a recognition of of a negative ping, but it dissipated much faster,
You've
right?
got to share more. You've got to
And
share.
the things that resonated positive with me, they glowed positive longer. And so here's the thing. So, okay, what's the business application? Number one, I was less stressed. During that time, I made 2 or 3 business decisions that when I came up with the idea, my partner Lindsay said, "Why did we ever think of that before?" It's because we had too much clutter, because the
Yep.
negative pings, they stay with us much longer. And by meditating, we basically build up a not a force field, but just a natural defense mechanism that doesn't let those things stay and fester. And so it allows us for more creative thought. And
Right.
so,
You'll be
people that know me would believe that I speak like this, but it really does make a difference.
So I do come from the land of meditation, and I'm going to lean on you now. Do share, please, because that sounds very exciting. So, Mark, what are you excited? Speaking of excitement, what are you excited about?
Well, what I'm excited about now is we have found a niche in what we call successionpreneurship, where we're helping folks, and it's often family businesses, but not always family businesses, when they're brave enough to admit that they're mortal and look 3 to 5 years out and actually start the planning for what the business is going to look like without them, and then take them through the process and basically be a steward. We're not financial experts. We're not law experts. We understand things like ESOPs and selling to private equity, and we can make those types of connections for people. And we never take any type of referral fees. It's so we stay completely objective for our clients, and we're advocates for them. But we've really helped a lot of firms uh, approach those things and have those conversations that were otherwise unspoken, and created a lot of stress. If it was a family business, it would create stress for the family. But even a regular business, it would create stress with the up and coming managers. Am I going to move my family to a new location if and this firm might sell next year? So it's about helping folks understand their options and then eventually execute on that plan. Along with that, we saw a s- and this is you can tie it to COVID and the changing job market and even some of the generational changes. But we saw a big gap between senior managers, and there were 10,000 people retiring every day, the Gen Xers retiring every day, and a big gap between those folks that are leaving with the institutional knowledge and then the up and coming folks. That mid range is typically not there anymore. It used to be a blemish if people were called career hoppers, and now it's career building. And so a lot of folks just haven't been at an organization for 5, 10, 15, 20 years. And so the institutional knowledge is not there.
So
So we created a program called Mind the Gap, and it's to help accelerate those folks that are viewed as potentially, longer term employees, and shine a light on them in a very, appropriate and professional development way, and ideally accelerate their development so they can be ready to take over some of the larger responsibilities that are coming down the pike. We came up with the idea last October at our planning retreat. We developed the content over the winter. We were hoping to start the program with 6 people, just have a small cohort. It's a year-long program. We had 7 people the first day, and I think that we just had 10 more folks that want to start another cohort in January. And so it tells us that there's a strong need and investment that's going to be made in those folks that are going to rise up and run the business, whether it's a publicly held firm or a family business or something in between.
And that's the amazing part about you and Blue Water. It's like, you always have a test or an article or information ready to go to meet our needs. And how do our listeners get on your, is it monthly bite
Oh
that
yeah, we have a weekly Blue Water Bite that just goes out, and it's
Blue Water bite?
yeah,
That's right.
the Blue Water Bite goes out Tuesday mornings, and thousands of people receive it. And we receive awards and nice testimonials. But boy, one of the best things is when I walk into a client's office, like your office, and I think one of your folks had printed out one of our Blue Water Bites, and it's up on the wall or by the coffee machine. What that means is that the things that we're talking about that are not rocket science, but they're important for human communication and interaction, they're resonating with folks, right? And we usually put some type of hopefully appropriate picture, sometimes a little comical, to make the point that we're making. And the Blue Water Bite is, here's the concept and here's the bite. I mean, this is how it applies to a professional at work. And so we're happy to add anyone to the distribution list. And again, what we're doing is we're trying to stay a couple years ahead of what our business owners, and sometimes we call them business sponsors, because they could be, potential partners, rising partners. And we work with many law firms, accountants, engineers, architects, et cetera. And, those are businesses that they're not family businesses, but they could be made up of 18 or 60 different partners. We have tools to help them have the conversations that need to be had, because otherwise it's like having that proverbial stone in your shoe. And it starts off as a little bit of a discomfort, and then it turns into a blister, and then it really starts to bother folks. And if no one talks about it, then usually bad things happen.
Custom facilitator. That's where I'll put you, right? It's very tailored. You understand your customer and can build uh, programs that are tailor made for your client, so to speak. So I'm remiss, the website where we can go sign up for the Blue Water Bite is it bluewateradvisory.com or
Just bluewateradvisory.com. Yes. And just to clarify what you were describing, we have over 50 modules of training that we've developed over the years. And we only license one type of material, and that's from Patrick Lencioni, classic
Yep.
five dysfunctions of a team. It's only because we haven't been able to find or write something better. He's he's the best when it comes to that.
Right. He
And
nailed it. Nailed it. I
yeah,
mean,
and I
literally.
had the privilege to share a stage with him a couple years ago, and he's just as nice in person as you see on the video. So we have about 50 modules of training, and then we will curate what we have and what our clients need so it fits them really well. We've grown strictly by referral, as Todd Barks referred me to you a long time ago. And we have really made a name for ourselves by being high touch and in person. So you can imagine what happened on March 20th or March 13th, 2020, when COVID hit. We were literally in the Key West airport, coming back with a client from a client offsite retreat when the world shut down. And so, we had, a year's worth of travel and programs on the calendar that just got put on the shelf. As as the universe has it, and we were blessed with a client not far from you in Orange County that had a distributed network of executives. They said, "Hey, we've got 30 high level executives that need support for the next year. Can you coach these folks through this terrible time that we're having?" And so that coaching basically carried us through the dark days of COVID and working from home and those types of things. And now we're back on the road.
This is a ton of fun. 30 seconds. Music.
Well, I'm a Jimmy Buffett fan, and last Friday
Oh, nice.
was a very sad day. I woke
It
up early
was.
and saw the news that I knew, or that he had passed away. And a lot of people just think of the Margaritaville and sitting on the beach with Corona, but he produced 56 albums in his career, and a couple of those were compilation albums. Many of those were live albums, but there were over 30 unique albums. And if you go back and listen to some of the words, that he was a poet, he was a philosopher, and, if you take the time to go on Spotify and listen to some of the things that aren't on the general Jimmy Buffett playlist, you get a whole different perspective. So,
Let's do one in honor. Let's do Margaritaville in honor of Jimmy Buffett tonight. Historical figures, Mark. 30 seconds.
historical figures, I'll give you a quiz. Who was what is the pen name for Samuel Clemens? $10 for that, Mark Twain. And
Oh, of course.
I
Okay.
so that's okay. You
Yeah.
still get your $10.
Yeah.
I admire him because what he wrote in the late 1800s, and we traveled around the world. He has this very long book that's about 1,200 pages called "Following the Equator." In fact, Jimmy Buffett has a song about that. But what he experienced in India and in Europe and the different countries that he went to, he basically sailed on a steamship around the world and wrote about his journey.
Yeah.
Those struggles and the political stripes and individual struggles that are still going on today. And so
It's
so I,
true.
I think it's interesting that people get so caught up at the moment, and the pendulum might swing one way or the other. And sometimes, usually when it swings to the extreme when it comes to society. But those things were going on back then. And I think the point is to figure out how we're going to make a life and do good in the world, to leave it better than we found it, with all of this noise that's around us.
What a beautiful way to end. I have one last one for you. If you had a billboard,
If I had a billboard, well, I'm gonna risk offending some people and borrow from the Bible a phrase from Luke 12:48 that says, for those who've been given much, much will be expected. And that's basically how I live my life. And if we've been fortunate enough to be having this conversation and be where we are in our careers, then we would be irresponsible if we weren't paying it forward.
amen, Brother Debinski. Well done. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on this episode of Secure IT as I continue the cybersecurity discussion with customers, vendors, end users, employees, and as with today's episode, trusted advisors, influencers, and custom facilitators, helping us to learn from their insights and knowledge and from their experiences. By now, you know well that you can find us on wherever podcasts exist. And just a gentle reminder to DM me on LinkedIn or Twitter or wherever you can find me, an email even with questions, kudos, or comments. We will share Mark's LinkedIn profile we publish this podcast. Thanks again, everyone, and see you next month.